Greetings and welcome back. Today I am joined by the legendary huMAN, the Beast of Melbourne, who walks about the street, doxed and fearless of the consequences. In any event, we're going to be talking about a number of things today. Fairly recently, huMAN put out a video titled Fighting the Fight Club, and I think a lot of relevant points were brought up in that video. And I think the video and some other things that I've been thinking about probably over the last year or two, but more generally, the course of sort of the existence of online MGTOW, really sort of been slowly crystallizing over time. But before I talk about my thoughts specifically, I ask huMAN, one, what motivated him to make that video? What were the thoughts behind it? As well as his own, I guess, personal philosophy and his own quote-unquote way of going his own way. So what really ultimately pushed you to make that video, Fighting the Fight Club? Because it's a great title, and there's a kind of irony there, in a sense. And anyway, I'll give the podium over to you.
Thanks for having me on. It's an interesting thing because that video was one of my loosest types of videos, because I tend to script and try and control the execution of it a fair bit, especially I have in the past, and the videos tend to be polished. And one of the reasons, I suppose, that I went ahead and started doing more film type videos and showing my face was the ability to sort of be a lot looser and let go of control. And so that video, aside from a couple of key points, it may have been about 5 bullet points, I just allowed myself to walk through the streets just freestyling some ideas. And then at the end, with a lot of footage, just coalescing it and making some sort of video. But it turned out in the end to be a lot better than I hoped or thought it would be. And it taught me a lot about the process of kind of letting go of control and the resultant sort of product that could sort of come out of it. And it sort of leads into a lot of the stuff that I tend to talk about on my channel in terms of helping guys let go of the control of the group that's going to give them safety, and dotting every I and crossing every T as though that's going to make their life better. It was just an exercise for me of proving that letting go and stumbling about things could actually produce something better than I thought. So,
is also part of the thought involved in, I mean, effectively, at least visually, doxing yourself to the world, something that, a lot of people deem fairly risky, and something that, I mean, we talked about it, I think, prior to you actually going forward with it, that it was almost like based on my impression at least, a sort of itch you had under your skin, and the way you communicated it to me was almost as if you needed to do it, because you were going to do it regardless, because that itch was just building up. You had to do it. Maybe let us know some of the thoughts that went into this, effectively, at least visually doxing yourself in a fairly fearless manner.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I spoke to you, only a handful of people that I sort of respected, you being one of them, but it's almost as though, when you're very adamant in your individual stance, and you almost ask people you respect and trust, what's your opinion? And if those people, even they're telling you, think twice, I wouldn't, and there's something inside me that's saying, no, I still want to do it. It almost solidified me having no reason but to do it, if that makes kind of a convoluted kind of sense. So if I was asking people like yourself and people in my personal life that I respected about, this is what I'm looking at doing, I really have this itch, as you said. I really want to sort of I really want to go further creatively. I mean, creatively, that was the main impetus, but the kind of content I do is fairly personal, philosophical, and very one-on-one, talking to the person watching my video. I've often said I want to convey that aspect in my videos as though I was talking to a friend over a coffee, a cup of tea, one-on-one, as you and I are doing here. So being able to show my face just added a lot more weight. And what it did was free a lot of people's convenient filling in of the blanks, where if I'd say something, whether it was about women or anything else, they could infer their own judgment simply by the fact of not being able to see me. Whereas when they see me, I look relaxed, I'm not angry, I'm smiling, I'm showing you going my own way. There's just a whole lot of factors in my favor to communicate what I want to. So everything was pointing to, no, human, you wanted to do this for so long, and everything makes sense. It was a creative decision mostly, but it was an itch that I felt myself having to do eventually.
Yeah.
Because it just irritated me that sorry to cut you off, but just irritated me that I didn't like hiding. The authenticity of what I was trying to communicate in my videos, I felt like I was being a fraud by hiding behind an avatar and hiding myself. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to do it, but in my case, the compulsion to sort of show me in an authentic way was far, far greater than any kind of safety.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think in your case, absolutely, that the way you've expressed this, described it, it makes perfect sense. I think there are always a number of variables when it comes to these types of things. For me, doxing oneself, I worry about my family. Not that I'm exceptionally close to them, but I've encountered over the years a number of crazy people that seem to either wish me harm or indirectly my family. And it's just not worth putting them in any sort of risk or danger to prove a point. I'm not, and I also don't have this itch I'm not as, I guess, visual or as creative as you are. Maybe that's part of it too. But really, pragmatically, for me, it comes down to concern for the well-being of my aging parents and a few other people. And so I mean, for me, it's just mostly a pragmatic issue. I'd care a lot less, or will care a lot less, once my parents are dead. But I totally understand your reasoning behind it. It makes sense because you are an artist of sorts, and so that urge that you have in that context is completely understandable. And I think it kind of proves the whole concept of going your way. There are different ways of going about it. I think that in your case, it sort of lines up with what we've come to know of you and expect of you. The pragmatic aspects, I don't know how much thought you've given to that, since you're effectively identifiable, I'd imagine, for the denizens of Melbourne, and how that might affect your relationship with your family or things like that. I mean, these are almost, I guess, well, they are separate issues, but something to be potentially concerned about. But again, I guess there's that tension between doing what you felt you needed to do and taking on certain risks. But if you actually feel at the end of the day, after all this, and effectively liberated and just better, freer in some sense, then it's definitely worth it. But unfortunately, the world, and more so on the internet, is filled with crazy people who have all manner of insane thought processes, and they, as you can probably imagine, are not necessarily going to follow the rules of etiquette or follow the rules of conduct that we would expect of decently mannered people. And so that's always, I would just say as a final note, a risk when it comes to these things.
Oh, sure. And a lot of that stuff kept getting repeated to me, say, over the course of my time creating content. And it was always there, but something kept, and it wasn't just the feeling of wanting to do it like an artist, but I weighed it up with rational common sense as well. I said, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Objectively, I mean, we can sort of extrapolate fantastical things to keep us from being as courageous as we would really like to be. And I thought, what's the worst that could happen? Essentially, just the women in my life wouldn't approve, and I frankly don't care. Aside from that, where I work, not one female works. It's all male, and frankly, I'm the most moderate in that place. The amount of misogyny in that all male company, without revealing what it is, I had nothing to worry about there. But it's more a case of, really, even if somebody confronted me or recognized me, I realized I wasn't producing really vitriolic content. I wasn't producing outrageous content. I wasn't being rude. So I could defend my point of view, and the way I speak in my videos, I literally speak exactly the same way when I'm around the people in my own life, in the real world, when asked and when involved in those conversations. So it was almost like I was allowing myself to retain some sort of quote unquote acronym, MGTOW mask, online to toe the line, whereas part of me really knew that I just wanted to live my own way, largely because of that creative side, and largely why going your own way spoke to me and still does. So I felt like I was not being myself as much as I could be, and the work that I wanted to do was suffering too, because I pushed the quality of my videos in terms of the way I wanted to do it, with still images, the audio quality, and a lot of that as far as I reasonably could. But I wanted to do so much more, and to connect and sort of delve into these topics the way I typically do in my videos. I wanted to do it more intimately, and I reached the wall in my previous method. Not to say that I still won't use those methods, because some people have gotten used to me just speaking into the microphone, and they appreciate that a lot more. The scripted videos where all I do is a quite measured way of talking, as you do, Stardust, and people like that. But one thing I actually like about showing my face, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, is the people that have now said, and I've had a few people unsubscribe, they've said, I liked you as a voice before. I don't know why, but I don't actually appreciate your videos as much as I used to, but good on you for doing what you did. And what I've come to realize is that my voice, just speaking to them, was essentially their voice in their head. But when I show my face, I'm making them confront themselves, because they can actually see I'm somebody else. I'm no longer a voice that's in their head, just audio.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point, because I just want to bring up something related to this. Having been on YouTube for quite some time, and this is probably, I could associate with this if your theory, and I think in some sense you're proposing the theory here, proves to be correct, that I'll make videos on whatever topic, and I'll get comments, and I'm thinking, what on earth does this comment have to do with my video? And I wonder now, and reflecting what you just said, if it's just that disassociate, there's just a voice in my case, and people always are going to read into a video what they want to read, and they go in with preconceptions, and they go in with their own biases and whatever. And yeah, I wonder if when you decided to, I guess, visualize yourself, as it were, it just scrambled people's I guess, connection, the wiring, because again, I get comments sometimes. I've gotten to the point where I'm completely apathetic about it. I used to get frustrated where I made a video about topic X and people are just ranting on about topic, G and H. And I'm thinking, what does this have to do with anything? And I'm wondering if that could in fact be part of it, that people associate a kind of, well, they're basically associating yourselves or projecting yourselves into a voice. And I think you make a very good point here that you putting yourself out there as a physical entity, as a guy wandering the streets of degenerate Melbourne, is it's a powerful statement, and it shows that here's this guy that is that's not me, and so maybe it's a lot easier in a sense to communicate a certain message. Maybe people won't engage in this biased disassociation that I've encountered time and again for years and years now, where comments just don't really have, it's an extent that they do have a relationship to tangentially, or I'm being willfully misunderstood. Almost as if the listener wants to hear something very specific, and even if you're not saying that specific thing, he'll still interpret it as such, and any deviation you have from what he wanted to hear going into listening to the video is interpreted in a hostile manner, if you get what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, and that's what made me think of this theory, is because when you're almost not almost, I think quite literally often, you're the voice running through their heads, particularly a voice such as yours. It's soothing. There's a lot of mentorship there, and it's very easy for them to kind of go off on a tangent and interpret their internal voice, which is yours, as kind of going into a certain direction that you had no intention of going, but they firmly believe that's where it should be because it's their voice. So I think I firmly believe, because a few of the commenters, the astute commenters on some of my recent videos, when I commented where I replied that I found it odd that a few of my longtime subscribers really didn't like it and a few dropped off, new ones came on because I've changed the format somewhat. I think some of them don't like it because I've made them confront themselves, because I'm not your voice. I'm my own person, and I'm confronting you that you need to perhaps go your own way, because look, I'm someone else. I'm not you. And so I found that interesting.
So effectively a type of a projection. I definitely think there's some validity to that. There's another element, of course, which is a lot more basic and boring, and that's that there's something about YouTube and media consumption in general. I've always likened it to, I mean, you and I are both kind of old, so I imagine you had the same thing growing up there too. In the States, the equivalent of sort of FM radio or whatever, where you're driving to work and you just as an auto response flip on the radio station every day at 8:15 in the morning or whatever on your drive to work or what have you, and it's just a habit. And it's not even because and it's not because that I don't know FM 95.7 is particularly good in this case. It's just it has a certain format, you've gotten used to it. And I found over the years that this I guess model of interaction with media has been amplified 1,000-fold on a place like YouTube, where people get used to a certain format and a certain presentation style. And so even deviation from the very technical structure of your presentation, the formatting, which you did, in fact, deviate very strongly from, going from pure visuals, disembodied voice to up in your face, is a very jarring experience, because I don't think people are aware of this or think very much, but people listen and pay attention to people, especially on YouTube, just because of they've gotten used to it. It's just sort of my analogy here, that sort of 95.7 FM that you turn on every morning without fail, because that's just what you've gotten used to over the years. Never mind deviations from topics, which, I know from my own experience, if I make MGTOW, quote unquote, MGTOW related videos, as opposed to topics that admittedly don't interest the majority of people that originally subscribed to me, there's a price to be paid for that, technically, in terms of viewership. But I also find that I've seen this with other channels. If you deviate from presentation style or so I'll give you an example. Years ago, I did one experiment on a very, I guess you could say, a very technical video about how men and women interact. It was maybe 3 years ago. And I dramatically altered my voice. And I altered it to the point where it's the kind of voice you'd expect from maybe a presenter of a documentary or something. And so it was very artificial. And people found that extremely jarring. Despite, I mean, the content I think was solid. It's one of my better videos. I analyzed the differences in I guess, mate attraction strategies and things like that. But it threw people off completely. And again, that wasn't the content was MGTOW-esque for sure, but it was the formatting and the presentation, in this case, the acoustics or the audio elements that threw people off. And I think that's another thing of so much about human nature, that we really become accustomed to things. And again, if all of a sudden you're going to work and 97.5 FM has maybe a different announcer, a different guy, he's doing things a different way, the type of music they're playing, they tend to vary it up a little bit more, whatever. All of a sudden, it's going to run interference in your head, and you're thinking, what the hell is this? This isn't my channel. This isn't my radio station. I think so if you combine those two things, your theory of confronting people, the fact that you're your own individual and you're not them, and they're then forcibly put in a situation where they have to disassociate themselves from you, with a change in format, which I think creates psychological interference in people's heads and a distaste, in my experience. It's a very powerful, I guess, repellent of sorts.
Well, yeah, I mean, just as a cliche, we've all heard the stories of people having love affairs online for years, and when they finally meet the person face to face, their fantasy has been shattered because they've so concretely sort of associated their own image in their head with the voice or the person they're sort of projecting. So I think a lot of that has validity, and to me, I think from all the bad that could happen, not that I really believe, I just really intuitively knew that showing myself would be not only here's what I always wanted to do with my channel, and I started to realize this the more content I made, is one thing that's sorely missing, and I never wanted to sort of fill a niche, but it's something I always wanted to do, and it became clearer the more videos I made, and this vista kind of was drawing me to it, was that I want to show guys what going your own way is, and not just tell them, because especially with audio, it's like you mentioned listening to a radio station. How often are we listening to radio stations in the background? We're doing something else, and we're not really paying attention.
It's passive. It's passive.
Else. And then we go, oh shit, let me rewind that. And you're not really paying attention to it. Whereas what I noticed when you actually, you can grab people's attention when they're watching a video of me. When I have an interlude of 5-second music and then there's a different scene, people's attention is constantly, it's forced to kind of pay attention to what this person is saying and the point I'm trying to make as a person. Whereas it's almost like music when all you are is a voice, unless the content is so engaging. And let's face it, sometimes the kind of content we do, even if it's just audio, may work well when it's not really punchy. Like, for instance, one of your most recent videos, Stardust, I thought was one of the best ones I've seen in a while, only because of my my kind of esoteric taste, is In Search of You. That was a very, very still, really beautiful presentation of an important message. and the low level of noise that sort of video and presentation requires, people who aren't sort of there aren't sort of as actualized to sort of absorb that. I could very easily see them sort of wandering off while that plays in the background and not really paying
huMAN,
attention.
I can confirm this from a subscriber. I wouldn't say call them confessions, but it just saying, yeah, the way I like to listen to Stardust is doing X activity and have them in the background. And so there's definitely a passivity there. And then, look, I actually think that has value too. If my content, gels better with you washing the dishes or playing a video game or whatever it is you're doing, and you feel you can just absorb it. It really depends. Very technical, demanding videos that I make, and on occasion it happens or has happened, people will note the difference. I've seen this too, where, it's a researched video and it's about something related to EvoPsych or whatever. People really need to pay attention. And so there is that difference. So, I don't take offense to that at all. If I can fulfill that niche and it pleases people, that's okay. But I can definitely understand why, in your case, you would want to grab their attention and just force them to commit themselves completely.
Well, I could. I was just sort of thinking a funny thought in terms of that video In Search of You compared to, say, some of Coltane's more recent ones. I could really get a lot of energy out in doing a workout to Coltane's videos, whereas your ones would be more meditative.
Well, we have Coltane and I are different people, way different. He's a visually very gifted, and also his voice and it's quite different. But on the it's interesting because this dovetails well with, I guess, the intended topic, going your own way. This video, Fighting in the Fight Club, kind of iconic title. I guess of one of the messages from that video, people, and this is, I think, the core of the issue. I thought about this for years now. Going your own way. It's very easy to say, go your own way, and not really explain what that entails. And that's in part, the difficulty, at least in part, is because there is no easy explanation, because it is a almost hyper-individualist or individualistic move on your part. And oftentimes, and this is just a fundamental problem with I guess, MGTOW concepts, is that for many men, and I think we have to acknowledge this fact, not everyone is like you. Going your own way entails dropping them off at a boat in the middle of the ocean without a sail, without a paddle, without oars, and saying, well, you see, go your own way. It's as a consequence of that feeling of being overwhelmed, there are two elements here. But that's one of the reasons why you get the kind of group formation that we've seen over the years in MGTOW. The other thing is that what I would say was a very forced push and drive to commercialize MGTOW and turn into a brand name, which I think has largely been successful. So the people who have sought to do that, I think, have been, they succeeded in what they wanted to do. I think my audience knows what I think about that. But the first element of just say, here, you're on this boat, you don't have any, maybe you can paddle with your arms, but you have no means. It's really, really difficult, I think, for the vast majority of men. And the evidence for this abounds. I mean, the fact that a guy like Jordan Peterson is so popular with a book, which is effectively 12 Rules for Life. I've not read it, but it's clearly a self-help book of sorts, mostly for men, mostly for young men. Saying, look, here, if you do these things, it's great. And people just lap it up. Men lap it. They love, I don't like using the term slave. It's not there, but men like direction. They like being able to follow a set of instructions and having those instructions lead somewhere. Now, I've had my own criticism these days of that sort of thing, because the problem, and one of the reasons why MGTOW exists, is because if you follow the prescribed instructions of the confirmed normative social order, it doesn't mean you're going to get rewarded, and oftentimes you might be punished for it, at the very least, not rewarded. But the alternative is I guess Peterson might say, is chaos. And some people can thrive in chaos. I think you're one of these people that, you just don't give two fucks and you can just go out in the world and do what you want to do. But we also have to acknowledge that people are different, and not everyone can exist with the degree of uncertainty about life and their place in the universe and just the direction that they want to go in without essentially going mad. And a way of dealing with that is creating, I'll be generous with the term community, because I don't think MGTOW is a coherent community. A community of nodding heads that all follow more or less the same trajectory, more or less the same interests. It's why I think this group, the Red Man group, I made a video, this sort of open letter to this guy. I don't know if you checked that one out. Entrepreneur with Cards. Yeah.
Yep.
Where, okay, so they're not MGTOW. They're kind of a advanced version of PUA. I don't really know how to describe them perfectly. But they all have their little interest in it. They like cars. Okay. They like chasing pussy. Okay. They like female validation. Okay. They like talking about game and how to game women, or even their wives in some cases, in case of Rollo Tomassi. And having that sort of joint bunch of interests gives men a sense of community, a sense of belonging. Let's face it, for most men, not having that sense of belonging is terrifying. Now, I've always been an outsider in just about everything I've done or seen. So I guess in that sense, I was born to be just born to live in chaos in some sense. And I don't even know if that's a good thing, but it is my nature, I think, for better or worse. But I also have to acknowledge, because when you're an outsider, and I don't want to call you an outsider, you seem to be a lot more gregarious and sociable than I am, but still, you pick up on signals. You notice that, hey, I'm the freak here. In this case, I'm referring to myself, Stardust. I'm the freak here. Other people are more normal. And when I observe the normal people, I know that they need that sense of belonging. They need that sense of community, for lack of a better word. They need to feel that they have to associate themselves with a label, and that label needs to mean something. Be that label the Red Man Group, MGTOW, manhood, or even going your own way as a label with a very fixed definition, or very, maybe not fixed, but a very well understood set of principles that go along with it, rather than the raw chaos that you embody, or in my case, just sort of floating in the ether of chaos. And I don't think, to be honest, a lot of men cope with that very well. And so that's where you get the Fight Club comes from. It's even if the interest is forced, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Look, a lot of great points. One thing I would say, I'm not a lover of chaos at all.
Okay, fair enough.
But I take no offense to it as well. I mean, people may think, look, I wanted to show myself because I wanted to be the example. I wanted to have the courage to do what I wanted to do. I knew that it was the right thing to do. But for me, I'm just very good at knowing and setting my boundaries. I would argue that someone like Coltrane loves chaos far more than I do, given what little I know of his lifestyle.
He struggles against it sometimes, but yeah, maybe.
Whereas I've always been much of a control freak, and the big lesson I learned in, say, the last decade, slowly and in a more pronounced fashion, I'd say in the last year or two, especially while delving deep into these topics and being able to sort of go into creating content, which sort of expanded my mind a bit more and allowed me to go down these rabbit holes and get to know myself a bit more and my opinions on things, is that the moment, like, I had to learn to let go of control, because I was I love controlling my life to such a degree in, I call it a previous life, though I felt it seemed like no matter how much I controlled my life, how much I had, how much money I earned, whatever I had, my worlds always tended to be in black and white, and I was tired of it, and I wanted to see in color like I could remember when I was a child. I always remember colors were brighter, sounds were more vivid, things looked better.
Kodak moments. You're old enough to remember what Kodak is, I imagine.
Yeah. Polaroids.
Yeah.
And look, it may be a fantasy, but being a creative as well and having lucid moments when I'm drawing something or writing something and really feeling alive and being connected with that youthful sort of going your own way mindset. Even as a child, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to be king of the world. I'm going to do whatever I want. And the world in front of me is really one that I generate. I always knew that was what I was trying to do with my channel, and part of showing my face and going out there and exploring film now was part of being more alive. And I mentioned that in the last video was intuitively, I think we all know that the stuff that keeps you safe doesn't make you feel that alive. And previously I was always trying to control everything, and no matter how much I controlled, my life was, and I'm not a big thrill seeker, but my life wasn't imbued in as much color as it is now, the more I let go of control. Because one thing I found was the moment I let go of control, I have it, which is a peculiar dichotomy. You think the more you control, the more secure your life is. But in my case, the more the walls closed in, the more I tried to perfect my life and the more I tried to control everything. Whereas when I set the boundaries I knew that were me and played within them and allowed chaos to just, not even chaos, let things just fall over, let things happen. Let me go into the street, as we mentioned before, with 5 bullet points. Let me walk around and just talk shit to the camera and let out a few things. And things came out that perhaps I wouldn't have released had I written them down in a very precise manner, or had I had a conversation with somebody else. So they may have only sort of come about the way they did. And just learning and getting to know myself and my own way through happy accidents where I'm happy to fall down and meander about and create things and not care if, I'm learning techniques in film as I'm doing this, and I'm being self-taught, and I'm enjoying the process, and I'm going to get to know myself even more through producing more and more polished visual videos in this way. And then the things I inform myself about while talking to the camera, those things will become more lucid. So to me, it's sort of evolving out loud and not being afraid to do all this kind of stuff, and not trying to control so much in an airtight script. And those things have their place, but I don't know. I might be rambling, but I'm just finding.
No, I understand, and I apologize for attributing. See, I see quite the opposite. I've never been a control freak. I've always seen myself as a kind of particle of dust floating in a sea of chaos. It's just I've never seen myself as having very much control. I've seen just the calamities of life be visited upon other people, myself, and just really having no power or control to rail against that stuff. So to me, I guess chaos is my element, because I just don't see. I could never even gain control of things, and every time I attempted to, I saw that it ultimately failed. It ultimately failed going up against the forces of entropy. At some point in time, I suppose I gave up on attempting to control too much, but I totally understand where you're coming from, that there's a certain freedom to be had in just letting go of everything, or many things at least, and not trying to exercise that control that used to have. But I mean, myself, I've never really tried to exercise control, because I always saw it as a kind of futile exercise, because life. I mean, yeah, if life to me is chaos. I've seen all the random shit happen to people, and it's just very, there's just an element of the unpredictable that is. No, I mean, give you an example. So, my father's elderly, but he still likes going hiking. And so last year, he was out on a hike, and he slipped in the wrong patch of whatever on a hill or a mountain, and he slid down, and basically forest rangers needed to find him, and he has I guess permanent damage to his leg, although he can sort of stumble by. Could have easily been his life, as opposed to just a leg injury, or just maybe nothing had happened. And I've seen these types of events happen over and over and over again. I've seen guys who follow the traditional track, guys I grew up with. They become, not bankers, but, investors, make all this money. And then I hear a story through second or third hand information, and, they're out on the street. And, they follow the right. So to me, obviously I try to create some semblance of order. I mean, otherwise, I try to pay the rent on time, whatever. But I just see that all these efforts of freakish control to be fairly futile, because as you maybe observed yourself, when you're trying to control every element of your life, not only does it create a kind of internal neuroticism in your head, when you encounter the inevitable chaos of life, those entropic factors, again, when your, elderly father slides down a mountain and, roll the die, does he walk away unscathed? Does he have permanent leg injury? Does he snap his spine because, he's 80 years old or whatever, or then nearabouts? I mean, obviously I was concerned, but I'm not shocked by these things. And it just sort of falls into a paradigm of my expectations, basically. And so I think that one thing when you are hyper, like a control freak of your own life, and things get a little out of whack, it throws a wrench in things much more and really fucks with your psychology a lot more than when you tend to embrace chaos and just the entropy of life. And that's been my experience, because I'm just a natural agent of chaos. I just see a sort of futility in trying to, and this is on my own personal perspective. I don't suggest other people, as I always say, go your own way. Don't do things as I do. But that's just who I am. I'm just, I'm somebody who's maybe not at one with the chaos, but I'm certainly, I'm not estranged from it, put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, look, don't get me wrong. I mentioned this. I had a conversation with Paul Elam earlier in the week. And I mentioned, don't get me wrong, like most people, it depends on your perspective, good or bad. And I've mentioned this to you before. I don't know how you would describe it. I wouldn't call it necessarily a confidence, but what works for me is, aside from the laws of nature, everything for me is down to will, and everything else, from my perspective, is up for negotiation. So I realize the laws of nature. I realize things outside of me I have no control over. Someone falling over, a loved one getting hurt, and I don't allow myself to have any responsibility, because I can't. It's not of my doing. It's not of my control. But everything to do with myself. It might sound funny, but most people who sort of feel helpless, you've mentioned it in a few of your videos about the malaise of sort of not knowing what to do once you take the red pill, being lost and all this. I've never experienced that. I've experienced the opposite, this exhilaration now of being out of prison and now being able to do whatever the hell I want. Like I'm reborn. Whereas most people take the red pill and it's almost like they're dead. It's the opposite feeling. For me, most people feel what I've observed. It's just a theory, but most people think they see this reality they're in as something they're dropped into. Now, I realize, gravity works, physics, biology. I realize all that stuff, but I don't actually see myself being dropped into reality as a pawn. I actually generate my reality.
I'm curious about this. Can I ask a question? Because it's fascinating. I'm wondering, have you ever had chronic health issues?
No, I've had injuries.
Right. So I think one of this, if I can add some insight, my ability to relate to these people sort of dropped. I mean, so my major health issue, and there are others, is chronic insomnia. And a lot of people can't imagine what it's like not to be able to sleep for 25 years. When you think that, this is why I don't attribute that much agency to myself, because if it were that, and I think this is why I can relate to the perspective of being dropped, because imagine if every day of your life is a random die roll, whether or not, if you want to get X done, it will be dependent on whether or not you can sleep, and your ability to sleep is a bunch of random variables that you effectively have no control over. I happen to be relatively lucid today, but it could have just as easily that I got an hour of sleep, because it happens, and I would have been shit, and I probably would have canceled the talk, or I would have forced my way through it. As it stands, I think I got a solid 4 hours. I'm not sure, but the point is that when you have chronic health issues that are very difficult to overcome, that you cannot overcome effectively, I think that gives you a different perspective, and it just goes to show that we're all made the end product of what we are, the substance of our experiences in our environment. That's why I asked the questions. I think that is a critical question, that if you've never had chronic health issues, you're much more inclined to believe in, I guess, type of authorship that you're referring to, which I have complete respect for. However, if you are permanently, and I have a lot of subs who have chronic health issues and they've communicated to me, it just puts a different perspective on things. I'm not saying that you couldn't work through things, but I mean, in certain situations. But when you have chronic health issues, I think it definitely gives you a different view of things. I just thought I'd throw that in there because it is a different perspective.
Oh, look, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But I'm saying these things that you have no control over, they're real. I have no qualms about that being real.
It's the things that you have control over are kind of, they're kind of random depending on the individual. So for you have control over this many things, and somebody else has control over that many things. And there might be, I mean, this is an extreme example, but if you're paraplegic, there are a whole range of activities that are just have been excluded to you, and so you're left with what you can do. So that's an extreme example, obviously.
Well, I would say in principle that's no different to like accepting what is.
Yes,
we've talked previously accepting women as they are. Not in the same way. If you're a paraplegic, you could continue for the rest of your life being miserable and longing to walk, and you never will, and you'll waste your life. You can want women to be different, and you waste your life chasing them and wanting them to be different. The point is to recognize what is, and then accept that, put it to the side, and do everything else you have power in doing. That's kind of
I totally agree with that, and largely that's what I do in my life. There was a time, my chronic insomnia started about 17, and I'm in my 40s now, so it's been around for a long time. But for most of that period, I say up until about a dozen years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was very combative. I got angry about it, and I pushed myself to do things that I simply couldn't do. I get angry. I was bitter. And at some point in time, you could call it resignation. I just accepted it as something that it's like gravity. It's like there are going to be times when I'm just non-functional and there's not much I can do about it. And, I do what I can. And I agree with you that you reach a kind of equilibrium. It's not that I wouldn't wish I were healthier or I could sleep like a normal human being, but I do what I can, and I don't punish myself for, not being gravity. Like, I can't just go off a fucking roof and fly, and in my case, I can't sleep like a normal human being either. So I just accept that. And the good days, I try to do what I can, and the bad days, I just, I try to, suffer in silence. But I think that it's a bit of Buddhist, I suppose, but going with the flow is oftentimes a lot more liberating than always fighting. But I think that the point you're making is almost these various lines, you could say lines of demarcation, where for certain, getting to know yourself is extremely important. And I wonder, broadly, as it relates to our discussion, in MGTOW circles at least, and just human beings, I don't think a lot of people know themselves very well. And you know yourself very well. I think, based on my impression, maybe I'm deluding myself. I think I know myself fairly well. It could be because we're both old-ish, old, whatever. And so we've had time and experience to give us that. But I think especially for younger men, they don't really know themselves well, so that they can't set those lines of demarcation. They can't say, here's what's natural and outside of my control, and yet we just acknowledge that that's going to differ between individuals, whether they're paraplegic, you, me, whatever. And so it's impossible, and maybe it's just because of a lack of life experience, because they're just young-ish or young, because there's only so much you can know at age 18, 20, 25. I'd argue even in your 30s, that will give you a kind of wisdom that will lead to what I would describe as a type of equanimity within yourself. And so, of course, you're going to go looking for a meaning outside of yourself. You're going to look for meaning in structures, organizations, in anything that can give you that sense. Because this, I've observed this for... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, in that sense, figuratively, the younger you are, you're like a baby chick with your mouth open. The older you get, you go out and hunt your meaning. You're an adult.
Yeah, but I think that my feeling about men, the way we evolved, and for most men, I'm a freak, of course, but they go most of their lives not really knowing themselves. And I think this is a function of male utility. Men are, for better or worse, they don't have to be, but as they are perceived by the world, and not just by women, or primarily, but also by their fellow men and by themselves, a function and a byproduct of their utility. And utility doesn't have very much to do with introspection. It has very little to do with knowing yourself or learning about yourself. It might have something to do with learning what you can do. So maybe you're an amateur carpenter and you learn how to do carpentry well. Okay, great. That doesn't tell you about your individual psychology or what would contribute most to your psychological well-being. And some men do thrive under that sort of utility project where they're just all they are human doings, as the late great
woman.
Yes, there you go. Thank you. It's been such a long time. But other times they go, that type of setup creates a kind of zombie of a man. Oftentimes, I've seen it many times. They just go through life being in some cases the protector provider, in some cases just the handyman, literally or figuratively or both, and they never have the time or even the inclination to think about all they've done. Well, all they estimate themselves to be is the sum of their doings. And so they've never taken the time to think about what makes them whole, which is something you've clearly done in this case, going with this more visceral, visual, filmy, live in the ghettos of Melbourne kind of thing. Well, maybe not ghettos, but you see my point. Because you go your whole life just, I don't know, fixing the furniture or screwing in light bulbs or, giving the wife a lift to the mall or whatever. It's just road activities. You don't need to think about what makes you complete, right?
Well, I mean, I recognized that just by observation as I was growing up and being told, here's the script, coming up in your early 20s, you're going to find the first woman that you can get along with. And then you marry her and you follow this script and that's what you're supposed to do. But just by observation, I just saw and not to say I've got friends who are they say they're very happy, they love their life, but I just saw it as a very different life that I was scared to death of, because I saw my individuality dying, and I would need to put on a role and a mask and ostensibly play a movie I wasn't a fan of for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that sounds like my, I guess, infamous video, "The Price of the Lie." I don't know if you're familiar with that. I like the analogy to script, a film script, because if you can keep the film script and there are, say, infinite lines in the script that you can read off until you drop dead, I suppose it's okay. But to me, and I guess to you also, to an extent, looking at that, it always was just a script, and eventually, you hit page 5 and it's over, and then I have nothing left to add to the script I'm supposed to keep on going with it. And to be honest, it did terrify me too. I don't have a problem with responsibility or obligations. What I do have an issue with is fakeness, falsity, however you want to put it, the falsity that can often go hand in hand with it. So I think I experienced that in a similar way. People running off of a script, but again,
I had where I think in psychology there's that moment when children are very young where they recognize their reflection in the mirror, and so they relate to themselves. They relate to sort of themselves existing. I had a sort of, mine's always been more extended than that. So whatever relationships, even growing up, and I saw, people getting married, I'd go, hang on a minute, what? Like they tell me, now your role is to do this, and now you do this, and now you're a provider, now you go to work, now you save up for a house, and then you buy a car, and then I'm saying, okay, that's what everyone wants from me. What about what I want? And I really resisted not existing. I really hated that feeling. It felt like death. It felt like the coffin lid closing in on me. And the more I went on, even when I knew very little, I just knew I couldn't cross that Rubicon of pulling that trigger and living her life, because that's all I saw. It like family, children, all that stuff. That was what she wanted. And I just honestly knew that wasn't what I wanted. And I gave myself enough time in my 20s. I thought, well, maybe I haven't realized it yet. Maybe it'll grow on me. And I found that as I got older, whether you want to call it stubborn, or I just started to know myself better, it never changed. If anything, I became more and more entrenched in defending my individuality, for want of a better word. I know you've made videos where you've questioned whether there's any actual real individuality to be had in the world, but I always felt that flame inside me and never wanting to let it die. And I think maybe that's where a lot of my courage comes from, is to keep that flame alive, because without it, I'm a walking zombie just waiting to die in my 80s or 70s.
I totally agree with that. Well, I'd say this about individuality. There are a lot of it's a politically loaded word these days, as we know. People toss around almost household lines, like, the sovereignty of the individual. I think, like many things, individuality is a byproduct of a nature that we have as we evolve. But really, some people are just more like you, or more like me, or more like whatever. What I would acknowledge and recognize is that most people are not very individual. Most people don't have that urge you have. In your case, it's as you described, as sort of like a fire burning. In my case, it's, I'm this, this speck of dust in this wide open space of chaos. I just don't relate to many people, and I never have, and they don't relate to me, and, I'm a freak of sorts. But I have to but that gives me insight to the idea that maybe obviously my way is not for most people, vast majority of people, and probably yours isn't too. I think that maybe that's why that video, but also the message of fighting the Fight Club, doesn't jive well with people, because again, I have the sense most people, both women and men, but specifically men, need that direction given to them. And maybe also, as you mentioned prior, in your previous incarnation as the sort of just the visual voice guy, that also is more like a blueprint of instructions of a sort, because, it doesn't have that visceral aspect that throws people off. And I think, for example, I'm going to do my very best right now to refrain from being too negative. Everyone knows how I feel about this content producer, but I'll Sandman, okay? I have to really restrain myself here, but so I think part of the appeal of Sandman is, again, the regularity, and that structure, and
Sure.
and that is just something that I just have to say it. Most people aren't like you, and most people aren't like me. And if you put out a message as radical as your message was in that video, or even you could say your life itself is a message, your life, that is, then there are two elements here. I'm just trying to break this down. I know that's not what you're trying to do, but people think because you live your life that way and you're making videos about how you live your life and presenting yourself to the camera, that somehow that translates to you telling them what to do. I know it's the opposite. I know you're saying, this is me, this is what I do, and you can do whatever fuck you want. If you want to go kayaking, to become a pro, do that, and for better or worse, if you want to, lead your life on a script, a movie script, you do that too.
I'm showing you what autonomy can look like, essentially.
It's huMAN's version of autonomy, and you're not saying that, hey, in order to do this, you need to become a graphic designer and then walk around Melbourne with a camera and a gray t-shirt and like you're not telling people, hey, this is MGTOW, this is going your own way. But I think this is the problem. This is where the misinterpretation comes in. I think this is the second element, because most people need direction, they need formatting, they need that script effectively. Any effort on your part to transmit a message of, here, look, this is how I live my life, is interpreted as you got to do things my way or the highway. And if it doesn't gel with their own set of, movies, film scripts or whatever, they're going to be somewhat hostile to that. I try to be careful about ever really being prescriptive about things. People call me offensive over that, but I recognize that that is an issue that people, especially in MGTOW, will, because of the way it's sort of fractured into almost factions. When you make a video like that, presenting yourself to the world, you're going to incur some wrath because people are going to think, hey, wait, huMAN's saying I need to do this. huMAN's saying, for example, my interest in you doing the quote unquote docs was just more, I'm interested in the psychology behind it. I noticed other people, they were almost trying to present an argument why you shouldn't have done it to sort of justify their own line of thinking on it. Do you see what I mean? That they're saying, like, here are the reasons not to do it, you shouldn't have done it. It's sort of almost formulaic. I'm more interested in saying, okay, why did he decide to do it? I have my reasons for not doing it, whatever. And I think that's the issue, really, is anytime you present yourself in your own light, and obviously present yourself physically, visually on the camera, people are going to interpret it as, this is how I need to do things too. And if they fall short of that, I could create a sense of hostility or resistance.
Well, it's biases as well, because the funny thing was that whole video was me having a sense of equanimity with the angry MGTOW guys. And right at the end, how I showed that piece of myself during sunset at the beach, just being very calm and saying, I don't hate you guys. I don't want to fight with anybody. I want to have open conversation. It was the video I've done the most in terms of laying down the arms and saying, I'm not angry. I can appreciate why some of you guys are angry. I've been there. I want us to sort of discuss and, for people who want to actually move past it, yada, 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 all that sort of stuff. So it's my most embracing video while saying I'm not part of the group MGTOW. I'm a man actually doing his own thing and going his own way. And I had the most downvotes on that video from a lot of MGTOW, even though it was my most sympathetic towards the angrier group guys. So a lot of people's biases sort of come into it. And I understand that. And I do, as I said at the end of the video, I do have a level of sympathy because I was there. I recognize where it's coming from. I recognize the pain that many of these guys probably feel. Some of the guys, like you've mentioned, they're saying, oh, easy for you, huMAN. I've got an ex-wife I'm paying alimony for. I don't see my children. I can barely make ends meet. You swanning around with your camera, looking all happy on some beach, and it's almost condescending. I get it. That's why I wanted to sort of portray it was me not wanting to be against anyone as much as I want people to be for themselves. That's the kind of message I want to get across.
Yeah, I get that. But again, I think people, when you're in a difficult situation, let's take a situation like that. You know, you're on the bad end of a divorce. You owe lots of money to your ex-wife. You're barely scraping by. You don't see your children. And if that's a major element of your life, it's very easy to be consumed by that in that hypothetical and not so hypothetical situation, because, there are a lot of men in that situation. So I think as good as your intentions are, you're not going to be able to reach people like that. It's just going to fall on deaf ears. In order to understand what you're trying to achieve with a message like that, and I guess almost a methodology, you need to be in a certain place. And by that, I don't mean physically, but mentally. And you need to be in, and your mental constitution, frankly speaking, is a reflection of your environment and what's happening to you. If you're that guy paying through the nose, whose life has effectively been reduced to misery through an ex-wife, and, you don't see your children, I think you can theoretically get out of that, but it's very easy to become hyper-focused on that, and then everything, so let's call him Bob. Bob, this guy who's suffering, everything that Bob looks at through this lens, right? And then you make a video like that, and it's seen through this lens, and it's seen as hostile. Anything related to that particular worldview will be, and in a positive light, it's hard to see, or sympathetic light is seen as good, but anything that's even a smidgen hostile, what I'm not saying it actually is, it seems as, then you can do this, you can walk around the beach, is going to be interpreted, at least in a hostile way. I think it's very natural, but I think there are people, men specifically, that you're not going to be able to reach, because they're in their own little world, their world of, I don't know, paying alimony, or their world of being angry about women, or whatever it might be. I think, if anything, the only universal takeaway from a lot of this is that you have to let go. And my own experience, not having ever officially been married or gone through divorce or any of this stuff, is, again, I'll relate to my own health issues of letting go of acknowledging that there are some things beyond my control. Now, I'm not saying it's a perfect analogy, but I do think that I'd imagine if I were in that situation of, the state is forcing me to pay alimony, I don't see my children, at some point in time, if I wanted to retain my sanity and move on, I would just say, this is a bit like a force of nature, like a health problem or gravity or whatever. It's just the way it is. And it's just another thing that you have to reckon with. But I don't know if everyone can do that. Eventually you have to let go of fighting obstacles and just go with the flow, even if it means getting swept up in the current. I mean, who knows? You might end up in a better spot if you get swept up in the current. Because if you're fighting it, you're just going to be exhausted, and eventually you're going to fail anyway. And then you might not even have the energy at the end of the day to enjoy what would have been if you had just not expended all that energy fighting the current,
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like I said, rationally, if there's a situation beyond your control, my mind tends to let go of it, because logically there's nothing I can do. What tends to give me anxiety is that which I don't attend to, that I know I can, whether it's health, being creative, producing content, making the most out of my life. It's not so much about being motivated as it is, part of it is kind of not wanting to die, not literally that sort of morosely, but sort of keeping that flame alive. Like that is what attracts me in my attitude. I've got this natural will to keep fanning my flame, because the moment it sort of diminishes, it's almost like something's diminishing my life, and the next step is the grave. It's not consciously that way, but I think that's where my natural will comes from. So I think that's where when I was younger, even the prospect of marriage suggesting itself over the horizon was of a similar bent, where it was trying to diminish my flame. And look, I'm not trying to do anything grandiose with my life and make any sort of huge impact, but my life is mine and nobody else's. And I've got this big sense of fairness about me and balance. So I would not expect anything of another. I would not demand anything of another that I wouldn't be expected to do myself. So I've got this sort of sense of balance and fairness. So whenever I saw the female script being put upon me, where I have to give 110% and she would barely give 5%, that was almost like death coming, the Grim Reaper coming over the horizon. So it's partly a natural thing. It's in me because I know there's no reason. I didn't learn this behavior. It's just kind of, why, for instance, am I artistic and no one in my family is? It's one of these anomalies and part of my sort of character and my makeup that I can't explain. But what I suppose I'm trying to do in my videos is express myself, and like you've mentioned in some of your videos, is you're not being prescriptive, you're just being descriptive, and perhaps it'll gel with a similar mind that'll say, hey, I think like that too, or that's answered a few questions. You've had a bit of experience with X, and then you're conveying it, and someone else who's just experiencing it and hasn't worked it out, you're answering some questions, and you've gone through some tribulations where you can sort of benefit somebody else. That's kind of what I'm doing. And mostly, a lot of the times I say I'm making videos for a younger version of myself. If anything, trying to mentor a younger version of me. And by dint of probability, there's probably a lot of me in my younger form out there. And if I reach some of those people and I extend back into history and help myself, I will. It's almost like self-care. I'm sharing my thoughts in my diary to essentially someone who's like me. I don't really care, and the byproduct is I can sort of creatively make these videos, which really doing these videos is really a really nice exercise and gives me a lot of purpose too. So it's always a win-win for me. I don't see any downside in producing these videos. And that's why another reason of showing myself was really, compared to the positives I will sort of put out there for myself, for others, entertain people, get better in a certain skill now with filmmaking, just sharpen my abilities. There's virtually no downside other than this small fear. And that's the other thing I wanted to get to is my mindset, and what I hope I convey in my videos is the ability to sort of see fear for the imposter it is, both in the fact that I showed myself and nothing's happened to me. Not that anyone needs to do the same, but the more we can let go of fear, irrational fear, the more we can actually go our own way. So all those things are a positive to me, whatever personality you are, and we're all very different. But I hope that something in my videos will click with part of somebody's different personality, and one of those tumblers will work for them. Obviously, you and I aren't going to be blueprints of anybody, but part of what we do and part of what we say may actually sort of match with one person's certain tumbler in their head, which will kind of domino into a lot of other aspects of their personality and help them. I mean, just in the video we're talking about, you left a comment underneath the video, and I don't know if you saw, one man actually reflected that yourself and Barbarossa helped him from committing suicide. And that's a really, really encouraging thing to hear. Not that we're trying to be this person. We're not making videos to prevent suicide, but it just kind of goes to show that helping people through being honest about our opinions is a really good thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think I can't not say this. It's a shame that a lot of, and I'm not saying this because I want some sort of special recognition, worried about Barbarossa's content, that the mass appeal or the commercialization of MGTOW has, some people think it's a great thing. Everyone knows his household name. But I'm not sure if authentic messages are reaching people. I'm not sure if in 2018 versus, say, 2010 or 11, the types of messages being put out by so-called MGTOW content producers are the types that are going to save men from killing themselves. Because the thing about Barbarossa's content, in addition to being very visceral, is intensely reflective. It really got the noggin jogging, as Mr. Medicare likes to say. And I'm not sure. I think something has been lost with just turning it into effectively a business enterprise in the way it's become. It's always, heartening to see messages like that, and I've received countless messages of that sort over the years. I've seen them, but yeah, I wonder. Everything comes with something gained and something lost, and I think in the current state of Fight Club style MGTOW, I'm not sure if that would reach a man in that situation, and actually, maybe anger could keep him going for a while, but I'm not sure if it would free him from I guess the prison of his own mind.
No, and I think that's the demarcation.
Yeah,
there's the and funnily enough, again, I think I talked about this with Paul recently, is the two types of the different personalities that can or cannot self-actualize is the very sharp line. On one side, you've got the person who's internally validated, and on the other side, you've got the person who's externally validated. And the person who's externally validated simply cannot self-actualize because they don't have an internal sense of their own validation. And the kind of person that saves themselves from suicide, I would suggest, or I'm speculating, something in what you or Barbarossa may have said triggered some sort of self-validation and saw themselves amongst all the chaos and ruin and what had been done to them. They weren't simply a pawn. They saw themselves as finally an entity that perhaps mattered and was worthy of actually existing, and then traveling down their own path and realizing themselves. Most people who they can't get out of the external validation mode. They'll stay in the poor me. They'll gravitate towards the group MGTOW, Fight Club, PUAs, because it gives them a suit of armor and it lets them beat their chest. It lets them game the system almost for revenge. They can game their ex-wife, even if it's not literally their ex-wife. It'll be the next woman. They'll get revenge on what is being owed to them. Whereas the internally validated person, what they read from the situation is not revenge, it's a letting go and not needing to fight, only seeing life from their own perspective, from inside out, not seeing the world having done them harm anymore. So the perspective is quite different. And I think that demarcation of on one side is internal validation and on the other side is external validation is the real difference in the type of personality that finds going your own way and being an individual liberating, as opposed to the other side that finds it frightening, nihilistic, morose, and in your words, quite a malaise. So and I don't think you can actually make someone the one or the other. All you can hope to do is portray your thoughts, and depending on your voice or my voice or the situation or what they see in our content, something clicks and spears them through the heart where they can finally see what you and I are seeing and trying to communicate. That's the best you can hope for. You can't force it. All you can do is offer something, and then if you're lucky, it'll fall into someone's tumbler the way you hope it would, and it would help them. Whereas everyone else is very resistant. They're effectively blocking all their tumblers.
Yeah, and I think this is just part of the human condition. People, they like their team. They feel comfortable in their team, and if something comes along that opposes their team, it's met with hostility. It's also a fundamental problem in human communication. And so the whole live and let live attitude, which I think you're espousing, and I definitely espouse, is very rare, because people need to live and let live means that you at least confident enough in your own life that you don't need to impose it upon other people. For people who can't do that, there's something that needs to be justified, whereas you just sort of exist unto yourself, for yourself. You don't need to justify anything to anyone. Maybe to yourself you feel you need to justify certain things, I agree. There's no way to reach people intentionally. It's a haphazard thing, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But on that note, there was a video that you wanted that I made that you wanted to maybe add something to at the beginning. We decided to post it or postpone it till the end of the video. This talk. Which video was
that? It was the male validation system,
right,
where you talked about the two types of validation as you saw it: the female validation and the thing validation.
Yeah.
And while listening to it, one thing that sort of sprung to my mind, and you talked about things like how the diminishment of the arts, music, and all that prevents guys from actually finding anything that they are internally validated by things, which was all true. But one thing that actually really sprung to mind was all these things that validate men. Women tend to be the only thing that demands to be their sole source of validation. So when you look at thing validation, it's not putting a gun to your head and say you must be obsessed or addicted with me, although guys can sort of manage that to one degree or another depending on their personalities. But women tend to be the only thing out there as a validation system for men where it's effectively the female nature puts a gun to men's head and said, you are going to be validated through me, and I want all of your validation to come through me. You're not allowed to be validated by anything else. And I noticed that back in the day in history, and I know it's not quite as simple as this, but men used to have a small period of female validation. You married the woman, then you could check that off your list and get on with the rest of your life, and then pursue your science, your business, or whatever, and spend your 20s, 30s, 40s, and so on, really pioneering your thing validation after you got the female validation out of the way in your teens or 20s.
Yeah.
Whereas now there's this almost cyclic rinse and repeat with, you've done videos with the lack of commitment and female nature towards commitment and changing her minds. And now it's almost like a recycling of a female wanting to be the sole source of a man's validation nonstop, cyclically, and for the rest of his life. He can never rest and actually find a thing to validate him for very long at all.
Well, there are very good technical reasons why it's not, I would call it sort of the done deal that, you put a little effort in, you married, and that was it. I mean, obviously the fact that no public divorce exists is an obstacle to a man just letting himself get on with his life and work on thing validation, because there's just a risk. Female validation aspect has to continually be stimulated, because there are huge consequences if you don't. That might be, in air quotes, quote unquote, great for women, but it's not that great for men. So there's some real world obstacles to moving on from that. But even in just non-marriage relationships, it's obviously the same thing. This is where this concept of game comes in. I'd imagine, and I'm not a historian of marriage or relationships, but I would imagine that the societal structures in place, say in the 1970s, in previous times, prevented there was no need for the degree and depth of quote unquote game to really be developed, because frankly speaking, the consequences didn't exist. I mean, game in the PUA sense or the red pill sense is just a response to this, as you put it, cyclical rinse and repeat modus operandi of dealing with women, where you constantly have to, game them and keep your game up, and you can never let down your guard. I mean, you're supposed to somehow get the thing validation, and they're supposed to somehow also work on your model airplanes, or I don't know, maybe like building chairs or whatever. But that's on top of everything else. It's not a peaceful state of mind. You might use it as a form of escapism. I don't think game was as pronounced a thing that needed to be spelt out to people, if only because it was there were certain safeguards, legal safeguards, societal, structural safeguards in place that prevented this kind of cyclical thing. And more importantly, there were social cues. I mean, let's be honest, women these days have no shame. There's no ill that can be committed on a part of a woman that can't be somehow justified. It's true. I'm sure you heard about this Asia Argento character who, right, this well past the wall, dried up actress woman who was cheating on what's his name, Anthony Bourdain, killed himself probably as a consequence related to that, not just that, but probably and then more recently is shown to have engaged effectively in child molestation, and in a situation where I think late Bourdain had to pay off the guy, gave him a lump sum of cash. And I mean, and sure, do people think she's a great person, but people will still rise to her defense. I don't think it would happen in the case of men. So there are just no boundaries for women socially, not even talking about the legal ones. And so that, again, fuels this perpetual cycle of always having to look for female validation. Let's face it, game is a way of maintaining that, the never-ending cycle of female validation. It's why guys like Rollo Tomasi have made a killing on Marriage Game these days. Do you think Marriage Game would have been a thing in 1780? I don't think so. There are too many other things people that are trying to survive. But yeah, you gotta game your wife. He even in a non-sexual way, obviously, talks about gaming his daughter. Using the tricks to. It's insane, but
it's almost like why would any man throughout in history need to keep the game, quote unquote, muscle alive and sharpened into his 30s or 40s?
No, they're more important. These guys are working on other things, whatever. It's not. I mean, Einstein, we now have that on record, had no patience for the nonsense his wives were giving him. He wanted to get on with his work.
It's almost like it's regressing men to be more childish in their pursuit of women, because it's almost like we're being told to keep our game alive all the time. It's as stupid as telling men to keep their abilities to build tree forts alive, or ride tricycles, or play tag. Improve that game and sharpen those skills perpetually through their whole life, because there's better tree houses to build, there's better tricycles to, being perpetually stuck in this childish game. It's like, we're not really interested in it, but because of the biological drive, the women are constantly rinsing and repeating. So it's almost like you need to keep your game alive to keep gaming the next woman and the next woman and the next woman.
Well, and more importantly, you need to keep your game alive to keep yourself alive, because, in some cases, you don't keep your game up, you'll call the police and you might be thrown in jail. I mean, who knows? It happens, it's kind of, that's how far things have gone, actually.
And also from the male's self-worth point of view, if he doesn't keep his game alive, he feels bad about himself.
Yeah, I mean that, right? Because if you relinquish your whole, I mean, this is the red pill and PUA view of MGTOW, that you're somehow relinquishing, giving up on something absolutely core and essential, and you just cannot be content without it. And yet, there's evidence, I think, loose evidence, that once that men had their very brief game phase and just moved on from history, and they weren't spending all this time thinking about gaming women. But yeah, they're. I don't think it's at this stage it's possible to reverse. If you're going to be part of it, if you're going to play the game, then yes, you need to game. Barbarossa has a great video on this. It's one of his classics on PUAs and games, and this video has got to be 8 years old by now, but it's back in the day, where he breaks down the notion of PUA game versus sort of striving for male excellence, the thing validation aspect. And he uses the analogy, or rather, I guess the descriptive landscape he uses was, particularly in the United States in the 1980s, was this crack epidemic, particularly in the black community, and how when you get rid of the thing validation, things that men want to achieve, all you have left is this almost jungle-like, female validation system. And you're just running around in circles, competing for female validation and practicing game. And the end product, as he pointed out in that now ancient video, is nothing but perhaps a pregnancy or an abortion. Usually, it's not like something. It's not like something's actually, there's some discovery or some insight that's been produced as a consequence. It's just, again, a pregnancy or an abortion. So it really, the game thing, it doesn't lead him. I'd argue actually it's bad for women too, in a sense, long term, because you're taking away energy that men have that would be better dispensed elsewhere. And it just, maintaining your uptake, your upkeep rather, so you're taking away from, what if you had let's say 100 men investigating their interests, you're bound to find something useful long term for quote unquote society or whatever, versus 100 men, perpetually running in circles doing the game shindig. So,
Yeah, it's a funny thing where when I listen to some of the rhetoric, it's pretend not to care about women so you can get them. And I think, how about authentically not caring about it? How about that? How about not pretending?
Well, right. It's like as a sort of goal. If you can get to the point where you can, almost convince them through your acting skills, your thespian skills, to maybe they'll actually think about it being interesting. And it's all predicated on wanting to attract them in the first place. It's silly, but yeah, I do think there's something.
You've got to pretend to not give a fuck in order to actually
get fucked.
Mask that you give a fuck. Yeah, it's kind of strange, and that's the thing that. When I hear traditionalists say you need to get your women back or you need to show them who's the man, I keep hearing the same tactics one would use to train a dog. And for me, I really wouldn't think well of myself by gaming a woman and treating her and gaming her like a pet in order to get one over her and feel superior and in control. I don't like what it says about me, feeling proud to have a pet that I can control. Yes, we know what female nature's like, but I wouldn't really respect myself very much having to feel superior to a dog in that respect.
Yeah, some men think it's necessary. If they're interested in that, that's fine. But yeah, I'm not interested in training a dog either. And even frankly speaking, keeping company with a dog is just, in that sense at least, although they're somewhat different beasts.
The whole dynamic of whether it's a pet or a woman, if you want this, you do the opposite or you do something tangential. It's like, why? I've always thought the direct method was the most sensible. if I want something, I'll reach for it. If I want something, I'll ask for it. If I want to go in that, it's almost like female nature and PU ways that work around female nature trying to game the system is like, if I want to go north, I have to travel south. And it never quite makes any sense. And I think a lot of guys that try and find certainty in that upside down world have a very hard time with, pickup lines and pretending not to give a fuck about something you genuinely, really desperately care about. I just imagine the mental anguish a lot of guys go through in a lot of the uncertain phase of trying to pick up women.
Yeah, I haven't dealt with women in it seems to be eons, so I could sort of distantly, vaguely remember. I can't personally relate to it. I find just life without women is just fundamentally better. But I'm a freak again.
I don't think you're a freak. I think again it's the person who's actually listening to and watching your videos. I actually find you, Stardust, as one of the very few guys who are genuinely and calmly going your own way and doing your own thing, whereas a lot of people see you as perhaps negative or nihilistic. Whereas I see you as
and I don't tell people to do what I'm doing. I like my life without women in it. To be honest, I walk. I have to sometimes be in public. I pay attention. I'm pretty keep my ears perked up, and every time I catch wind of something that I would typify as female, it just doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in. I have my own quirky interests that I don't expect anyone else necessarily to share. At the moment, I've become obsessed with learning some modding techniques for a particular game. It's like my current interest, and it won't interest very many people, but it's it's keeping me preoccupied, and it's fine. I don't, but yeah, I think that it's projection that people think that I'm trying to say you need to do things this way. You need to just disengage with women. No, if you want to engage with women, fine. If you can't find peace of mind by just not engaging with women, then I wouldn't suggest you do it. But for me, I just don't want to deal with women, or deal with women as little as possible. I have no interest. Typically, the conversations they have don't interest me. Their thoughts don't interest me. They even online. There's a channel I like for sort of intellectual discussion. They had these two females on once, and everything that I'd come to expect from this channel, it sort of gets various people on. I don't sleep much, but I metaphorically, I felt like falling asleep after half an hour because these women were just engaging in a kind of gossip discussion rather than analysis. Okay, this is all. So I have enough cues in online and in the real world to remind me of why I vastly prefer my life without having any real contact with women, and it's a for me, it's a life better lived. I mean, I'm not a person to express too much regret because I'm trying to be stoic about these things. What's done is done. But I wish I had this mentality 15 years ago.
I don't think it's just about the women thing as well. I think just the way you present yourself, the things you talk about, and sort of your belief system and how calm you are and how accepting you are of things. Again, I'll go back to the person that's more internally validated will see you doing your own thing. So someone who watched the great video you recently did in Search of You, someone like myself will find that a refreshing and very liberating an important video, whereas someone who's externally validated will find it depressing. So it depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
You've talked about who can and can't really find it struggle to go their own way. There's different types of people, and that's a perfect example. An internally validated person will find that a breath of fresh air and will fan that flame of individuality watching that video, and someone who's externally validated will find it completely depressing or will cause them to fall asleep. And similarly to you watched a couple of women blathering on, you fell asleep, whereas someone else who's externally validated and on the gynocentric treadmill will be completely captivated by two women talking nonsense.
I can't relate. I don't. Yeah, I just, yeah. So, yeah, I agree. I'm pretty self-deprecating, and so I don't really, any compliments thrown my way are usually dismissed out of hand. I like to think I know my own capacities pretty well. So, yeah, I think that's probably pretty accurate. And again, I'm not, I think that the takeaway from all of this ultimately is that, in your case specifically, you're just expressing your own little way of doing things, and if people find something in that resonates with them, that's great, and if not, that's fine too. You're not hostile towards them. I'm not hostile to anyone in particular, and I try to understand all sides of an argument and people trying to express a position. It's not necessarily because I'm trying to actively be on friendly terms with everyone, but I think give everyone a fair shake, and I try to. There's value in trying to understand other perspectives, particularly because, especially if your perspective, mine, is pretty limited, and to well, again, I'm a bit of a freak. Aren't many people that share my views of things, so yeah, it's fine.
You've got a live and let live attitude. No one can actually say that you're very prescriptive and dogmatic. They
try
can
not
say
to be. If it's the extent that I am, it's subconscious. I don't think it's a conscious effort.
No, I objectively, I can pretty much say that.
But people, that's the thing. People find are very hostile towards that. Fence sitting, as they call it. Sometimes is one way of describing it. That people like to see people fully committed, with their both feet in the water, or I'm putting it a certain way,
because it gives them a sense of security. That's
of course. Well, I know that. I'm not saying I'm some cosmic entity, but the fact that I'm a quote unquote fence sitter does give people a sense of uncertainty about their own lives, based on my impression, at least. People, I get. I've gotten, okay, they shut off the messaging, but I've, received messages over time. What do I do with this? Or what should I do? And people actually expect me to give them life advice. And to me, that's absolutely silly. For one thing, I don't know the first thing about it. They write a paragraph to me, and I'm supposed to well, okay, this is your situation, and now I'm going to figure. I don't know the first thing about your life, guy. I don't know why you would come to me. For one, do we have anything in common? Do we have a common background? Do we study? Why would I be just because I make YouTube videos? And then they actually get angry when I say I just don't know what's best for you. I don't know. You're gonna have to figure it out on your own. It's scary. I get it, but I'm the last person in most cases to give advice. Now, if there's a very specific thing, so someone said to me, I've been studying languages and I've been thinking about becoming a translator. I could give them some advice that might be valid because I have some experience in that field, and I probably would say no for a variety of reasons. But the point is, it's very specific rather than, so I'm in this situation. I got my girlfriend. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know what you're supposed to do. I wish, this is my pet peeve with people. I wish more people would say I don't know. Be a lot more honest.
Of someone who's a little bit more, say, awake, or I hate to use the word enlightened, because one thing I found, and I've talked to people that are way smarter than me, and people who I consider as mentors and published authors and real intellectual thinkers, and most of them would also say that the older you get, the less you know. And there's this letting go of expectations, of control, and being a lot more open and introspective. It all kind of points in the same direction. One of my recent videos, Small Victories, where I tried to outline some points of what I do when I'm trying to get myself going, or in the past where I've sort of been in a funk, I made it quite obvious that these were just the things that worked for me. And I'm not being prescriptive. You just need to find similar things perhaps that work for you. And I hope some of these things speak to you. And I'm similar to you, where I kind of say, here's what I think. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, you're not my audience. Again, I'm speaking to a younger version of me. I'm speaking to a mind such as mine. That's my audience. I've no interest in trying to convince or convert people or turn people into men going their own way or convince them of my point of view. I'm just describing my individual point of view and my internal, how could you put it, the things that I've discovered and sharing them, because I know a lot of those things when I've watched other people's videos have helped me and helped me figure out my own way. And if anything, I'd like to contribute a little bit of that. The people that want sort of prescribed bullet points, the things you're describing, I get those people too. I feel awful. You're really not telling me much, human. You're telling me to just let go and go my own way and figure things out for myself. But you're not really giving me any practical steps. But as you say, I'm not you. I don't have your life. I don't have your responsibilities. I don't have your lack of responsibilities in certain aspects. So I can't pretend to tell you, who am I to tell someone, leave your wife, leave your children, quit your job?
Yeah, these are huge things. I guess it would be different, as I pointed out, if somebody said, well, human, I want to learn to do some graphics like you. Can you give me some pointers? You could probably tell them something about that because it's very specific, right?
Yeah, they're roles. They're almost jobs. They're kind of.
It's not the same thing as what do I do with my life? And there's another fine point I'd like to make here is that taking a line from Al Pacino from Devil's Advocate, where he jokes, playing the devil, the worst vice is advice. I found that advice in general is just ignored. I not too long ago, I have a close friend who I regard effectively as my nephew that I've, I guess, I don't like to use the term mentored, but certainly, I guess, yeah, I have a avuncular uncle-like position in his life because his family is not, it's a difficult family situation for him. And he remarked to me a while back, that, on every account where he asked for advice and I had given it to him, it turns out, I'm not saying I'm a prophet, but just through life experience that I had been right and he had ignored it anyway. That they're, people don't really follow advice. They end up the tendency is for people to do what they're going to do anyway, even if you do give them a general set of advice of, maybe you want to, because they follow their instincts. They follow their gut more. So I find advice, unless it's very specific, to trying to accomplish a task, like a job, as you pointed out, is pretty useless. Because then if it's a job or something, like a tiny bit of coding I've been learning to mod this game I want to mod, okay, it's very specific, I need to learn, okay, but it's not life advice. And I think people end up just ignoring advice. It's largely wasted effort. And also, because people they do their own thing. People follow their guts. We're creatures of instinct. It takes many years.
It's a healthy thing. That's a healthy thing in some ways when people, no matter what advice you give them, they really, for want of a better word, go their own way in their decision. No matter what you say, they're really determined to do what they want to do. And that's great.
Yeah.
Frustrating thing is when someone gets married 3 times and just follows the same pattern and blames the world and everyone else external except for themselves. That's the frustrating thing.
Yeah, and frankly, I'm not looking to save people. I don't, whatever that means. Person's like that, and that's what the person is like. I'm not going to. I just feel no compulsion to intervene in people's lives, and there's I have to get going soon, but I want to point a few things out before I do. So there's an illusion, almost like a fog, that emerges from being a YouTube personality of sorts. That people think that because and people delude themselves into thinking they're an authority too. There's some sort of authority figure that you automatically have something of value to say. And I just go out on a limb and say, maybe I have something of value to say, and maybe I don't. Maybe everything I say is useless. Maybe it's really useful. I don't know. For some people, I'm sure it's useful. And for others, it might be useless, and then everything in between. There's nothing fundamentally different from me or a person with no YouTube content. And I think YouTube helps erect this mirage in people's minds oftentimes. And the people who then create content allow that mirage get to their heads and think that they're, frankly speaking, somebody special when they're not. They're just people. And the audience then laps it up, and so there's a kind of authority figure, in air quotes, or a guru or some guy. I mean, this entrepreneur guy at Cars is a perfect example. He's just a guy. He happens to have a YouTube channel and a quote-unquote business based on quote-unquote red pill philosophy, whatever that means. And the YouTube format lends him an air of authority and knowledge and all these things. And the reason why I made that video, the open letter, in large measure, was because the guy who wrote the letter to him, email, and paid, I think, $70 or $80 for it. He had very specific concerns that weren't even being addressed. The guy was saying, yeah, well, you gotta look for higher quality women, bruh. Have you thought about starting a new business? The guy's saying, no, I'm not really feeling that anymore. What do I do? Just, try a new business, bruh. And he's not even, his question isn't even being addressed. And I think this is a problem with YouTube, that YouTube confers upon people this notion of authority, and sometimes it's intentional, like if you're trying to run a business like this, Entrepreneurs with Cars character does. And other times it just naturally occurs, and you think there's something particularly interesting about what you have to say, not because you've thought it through or you have knowledge, but merely because you're a YouTube personality. I just don't, so if I think I have something valuable to say about a specific topic, I might say it, but it's not going to have universal value. I think, again, we need more people out there who say, well, I don't know. And I certainly don't know what's best for you.
Well, when you say that, it forces, again, people to ask themselves. You're not telling them. When you're not offering them a black or white or right or wrong. You're effectively saying, look, I know what works for me. How about you think? This is what I think. Maybe you should think as well. And in that video I mentioned of yours recently, In Search of You, you quite astutely said and pointed out that how many people actually try and find out who they are, and look in the mirror in that way, rather than what should I do? Give me the answer, push me in the direction, and cross my fingers. Let's hope it's rewarding. You've mentioned. Jordan Peterson mentions responsibility as well. Responsibility is an important part, but responsibility for you, responsibility from having some sort of intellectual curiosity about yourself, and like coveting like what selfishly you want and no one else. Like no matter how small the thing is, whether it's playing video games, researching history, learning a new language, making sort of the videos I'm making, just whatever gives you a spark of life and an interest to sort of do something as a male human doing that just rewards you and no one else, and you're not asking anyone else for permission, nor do you give a fuck what anyone else thinks. That's the kind of stuff I hope to sort of show and imbue in my videos, not telling anyone what to do, but showing them that just be alive and lean into the interest that you want to do, and don't wait for whether it's Richard Cooper or anyone else to kind of give you the answers of what your prescribed direction should be. To me, it's like, what a waste. You've got this blank sheet of paper, and what I'm saying is you can grab a pencil and draw anything you want. And someone else is saying, no, you need to start a business. Hey, bro,
you thought about starting a new business? My old business got stale. Just, do the same thing you did before. Maybe you'll get different results.
Well, the thing, when I hear people saying, I want to start a business, all I hear is people saying, I want to be free from my boss. I don't want to be told what to do. Right. I want to go my own way. I want to be autonomous. That's what I hear when I hear people saying I should start a business. And that's what these commercialized aspects on YouTube, whenever they say start your business, live the laptop lifestyle, they're trying to tap into people wanting to go their own way and do their own thing and being autonomous and let go of all this bullshit that gynocentrism is pushed onto us so far that it's become laughable, and people feel like they're in a pressure cooker that they need to release and kind of really break out and break free. And unfortunately, people like, these car salesmen that are selling you autonomy, they're not selling you how to open your gates. They're selling you what door to walk through, lest you be an embarrassing idiot. Like it's, I'm trying to tell guys that walk through your own door. Let go of the armor. Stop being tough. Don't be macho. Let go of control. Because the moment you let go of it all is like you start having more. The more you let go. I mean, it's no wonder that even videos recently on YouTube, have you noticed how the popularity of minimalism has increased in videos? I've noticed the mentality of minimalism has increased because people are wanting to let go of a lot of rubbish and old baggage, and they're getting rid of a lot of things in their life physically, which they should be letting go of mentally. Physically is a good step. It can actually start to domino affect your mental clarity of actually letting go of being minimalistic in your thinking. But I've noticed an increase in minimalism online because people are tired of this clutter. They're tired of the old accumulation of information and spinning 12 plates and trying to have some sort of cohesive life. That the point is to let the plates crash, clear the decks, and only add to your life that which makes sense and have it very simple and things that make sense to you. Not, let's go back to the past and game women and put on these lion suits and pretend to be alpha males. It's such a load of shit. It's leading men in the opposite direction. Their autonomy is in the opposite direction to which that today's macho posturing of pickup artistry is actually trying to push on them. They're leading him in the wrong direction.
Yeah, well, again, I'm convinced that a lot of men don't even want to be or can be autonomous, which is fine. There are niches in life for everyone. I think even a majority, in this case, of men just cannot exist without whatever framework you game. That's why a guy like Richard Cooper is successful in selling his cars, metaphorically or otherwise, because people are these men, they're looking for advice, mentorship, counsel, guidance, however you want to put it. They're looking for that. They're simply, for whatever reason, not capable of thinking outside of that box. So I think people like you, I mean, if everything you've always described to me has been a kind of, it's been along the trajectory of a sort of lifelong endeavor, and I've observed my own weirdness throughout my life too. I'm not saying you're a weirdo. I will, because I don't want to be rude. I'm definitely a weirdo. But maybe in your own way, you're a bit weird, if that's okay. And so if you're okay. So if you're a bit weird, right? Yeah. You're going to notice that at a fairly early age. You're going to notice that, as you pointed out, certain things are, you said, wait a second, this, in your case, if I do this, is going to kill me, metaphorically speaking. And I just noticed my own strange interests and just not really flowing with the crowd too well as a young person. You pick up on that. That creates in a sense, a lifetime preoccupation with trying to figure out what you are and who you are. Whereas if you just naturally blend in to varying degrees, or even to blend in a little bit, it's going to become a lot harder. I think the kind of person that you are starts very early because you weren't, in fact, I don't know the term, you weren't born to run with the crowd, basically. And neither was I, albeit in a different way.
Oh, look, part of it might have been socialized. I was an only child for the first 10 years of my life, and a lot of my character got developed. A lot of my selfishness probably got developed then. But in terms of being a weirdo, I always found it funny where I'm generally in gynocentric speak a weirdo because I place myself first. And I always found that odd. Whenever I placed myself first, I was an outsider. And it was objectively, to me, ridiculous. It just made me more righteous, because philosophically and by principle, it didn't make sense. Like, why is only one party? The scales are out of balance. If I can't treat myself well, why is the right thing to do to treat everyone else well? Yeah. What about me?
So you got to save yourself first. You know, it's the idea. I mean, it's a general principle, right? Let's say the ship capsizes and you're the only ones capable of saving a couple of people. It's no help to anyone else if you're the first one to drown, right? You need to be the person who gets yourself, I don't know, on a raft or gets the life vest, and then, if you really want to, you can go about helping other people.
Yeah, I can't. I'm of no use to anyone if I don't take care of myself first to be able to help other people. Yeah. With me, not to burn. Like, I've got a video coming up, but that talks on this point where I always in my past, when I used to date quite a bit, I always was quite forthright in telling women that, you know, you come second. And I'll say things like, at the very most, you'll get 50% of me. And women in their romantic minds will frown upon that. And they'll say, yeah, I want all of you. And with me, my mentality is, fucking hell, you bitch. You can't, 50% is not good enough. I can't have anything for myself. 50% is the most anyone gets in my life, and that's not good enough for you. And so I've always retained this balanced, objective kind of fairness. Like, I won't ask for more than 50% from somebody, or I won't ask for more than anyone will give, freely and honestly. Whereas the gynocentric and romantic brain will want all of you, 100% of you. There's nothing to be left for yourself, and no wonder men are left as empty husks after a relationship, because there's nothing left. I always found that really interesting, that 50% was never enough. And so I've always had that, no, I come first, you get 50% of me at best. But most of my life is for me, because it is mine.
Yeah. I can sort of, well, again, I just no interest in dealing with women in any capacity. So I couldn't say I really interact with them. And to be fair, they're probably not interested in me. I don't do anything that's particularly reeks of success. My interests are very niche. And, so whatever. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. But again, the gynocentric society run wild. Everything is part of that treadmill of female validation, gaming them, rinse and repeat. Again, I think long term it's just not good. Most of the things that have gotten done and by humanity were done after men got past women and just moved on with their interests. But we're kind of in a difficult spot right now. To say the least.
That was just the interesting point I wanted to add on to an observation I made with your video, was now that we have to perpetually keep gaming because, relationships don't last, and it's a perpetual cycle of biology being rinsed and repeated until the grave, that being self-actualized and finding your thing validation later is almost short-circuited by the cyclic trend to kind of keep focusing your validation on women perpetually. I just found that an interesting sort of thing. And the fact that women demand to be your sole source of validation, not like thing validation.
Yeah. And I think they do so to their own detriment. But I don't think most people have the foresight to really think about the consequence of lapping, just dousing women in attention nonstop and not letting men get on with their lives to do the things that are long-term more important, personal interests otherwise. But yeah, it's definitely a very salient point, I think. Unfortunately, time is slowly running out for me, as it tends to, being in this mortal coil. But I want to thank huMAN for joining me. He's safe to say, a legend in the quote-unquote MGTOW community. The community we just described doesn't really exist. but a legend in MGTOW content production. I'm sure he'll be producing a lot of more interesting videos in the future. And
I broke the first rule of MGTOW. You do not show your face in MGTOW.
Right. Yeah, I think it was a great conversation. I thank him for joining me. And when the stars align, I'm reasonably sure we can have conversations of this sort in the future. So I will wish him well in his winter wonderland. It's still winter there. And I'm going to get about my business. And I'll link to his video that we're talking about, obviously, and his channel, in case you don't know him. Check him out. And thanks for tuning in. And I will check you out later. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.